What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Corey Hughes' Bloody History. We are continuing Loran Hall from the Weisberg collection, part 3. We're just going to jump right back into it and pick up from where we left off. We're on item number 20. Let me see. What do we have here? Looks like LA 8975, possible FBI document. Dick Watley, 3350 Northwest 18th Terrace, Miami, Florida. On November 23rd, 1963, Sid Marks, Gardena, California, advised that about 30 days ago, or a little more, he was in the private detective office of Dick Hathcock at 6603 Hollywood Boulevard, Los Angeles, California. At this time, an associate of Hathcock, Roy Payne, was there, and prior to leaving, asked Marks and Hathcock if anyone had been in to get a rifle for $50. Payne is a white male, 6 foot, 210 pounds, with a shaved bald head. After a while, an individual named Skip came in and got a high-powered rifle, which looked identical to the one shown on television on November 23rd, 1963, as being used in the assassination of President Kennedy. Skip is a male, Mexican, 6 foot tall, 40 to 45 years old, slender, and a loudmouth. Okay, that whole description is bullshit because he's born in Newton, Kansas. He's a white guy, and he used the alias of Lorenzo Pasio, but he's not a Mexican, okay? So this is bullshit. On November 23rd, 63, Richard Hathcock, Allied International Detective, Suite 310, 6605 Hollywood Boulevard, Los Angeles. Telephone number MO 4-4-5604. Something Roy Payne, he advised Roy Payne, his associate in the above enterprise. Hathcock advised as follows, that Hathcock, has known Dick Watley for several years. Watley, to the best of Hathcock's information, currently resides at 3350 Northwest 16th Terrace in Miami, Florida. Watley is a male Caucasian. Prior to Hathcock's present occupation, he was the proprietor of Adventurer's Corner, a shop at the corner of Sunset and La Brea, Los Angeles, which sold articles from all over the world and was an official gathering place for adventurers in this area. So I'm just going to advise you that we're going to have some duplication of information. When you go through 100 documents on one person, there's always going to be some overlap. And I've done my best to X out some of the duplication stuff, but just in reading this, I can tell that I've gone over, not this particular document, but perhaps some of this information before. I think we're going to end up going over the Richard Hathcock stuff a whole bunch of times. But shortly after the Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba, Watley, whom Hathcock had not seen for some time, came into the Adventurer's Corner and gave Hathcock a shoulder patch, which had a skull and crossbones on it, plus the words Brigada Internacional. Watley told Hathcock that he had been in Guatemala instructing troops down there, and that he'd pulled out a week or two prior to the Bay of Pigs invasion and had not participated in the invasion. Hathcock did not see Watley again until 7 or 8 months ago, when he came to Hathcock's office with 2 other men, all 3 of whom were wearing green fatigues, and one of the men had a mohawk. The men were interested in getting into the wild animal business and asked Hathcock where they could get some wild animals. Approximately 1 year ago, Jerry Patrick, whose true name is Jerry Hemming, a male Caucasian, approximately 30 to 31, 6 foot 4 inches tall, 230 pounds, well-built, curly brown hair, handsome, and Lorenzo Pasio, also known as Lorenzo Hall and Skip Hall, that's Loran Hall, a male Caucasian, 35 to 42 years, 5 foot 11 inches tall, 175 to 180, black hair, mustache, ruddy complexion, from Wichita, Kansas, came into Hathcock's office, which was then located at 6715 Hollywood Boulevard, stating that they were broke and that they knew Dick Watley, and Watley sent them to him. They had with them a set of golf clubs and a .30-06 Johnson semi-automatic rifle with a Bushnell variable-powered scope. Hathcock loaned them $100, $50 on each item, and it was his understanding they were to pick up the articles as soon as possible. Hathcock only saw Jerry Patrick once after that, and that was about a week later when he came into the offices. Several months ago, since the men did not retrieve the articles, Hathcock sold the golf clubs, and on September 18th, 1963, Lorenzo Hall came in with $50 and retrieved the rifle. Shortly thereafter, Hathcock received a telephone call from Jerry Patrick, who was residing at 2450 Northwest North River Drive, Miami, Florida, inquiring as to whether Hathcock still had the rifle. Hathcock told him he had given the rifle to Hall for $50, and this seemed to irritate Patrick to some extent. Since then, Hathcock has sent the receipt he received from Hall for the $50 to Patrick to convince him that he had returned the rifle. On the day Hall retrieved the rifle, he sold him a Bolex motion picture camera with a telephoto lens, which was then the property of Hathcock. Hall paid by 2 checks, one drawn on the Citizens Bank on the account of the Committee to Free Cuba and on the amount of $350, and another in the amount of $150. Hathcock then gave Hall back $100. Hathcock advised that both Patrick and Hall are violent anti-communists and anti-Castro, and they had both told him they fought in the mountains with Castro in Cuba, however, fell out with him after the revolution. Lorenzo told Hathcock that he spent months in prison in Cuba, however, eventually got back to the United States. Patrick stated he fell out with Castro and eventually got back to the United States as well. Hathcock has Xerox copies of newspaper articles from Florida in his office concerning the anti-Castro troops training there, and Patrick's picture appears in one of the anti-Castro troops. Patrick, when in Los Angeles, had an address of 1209 South Atlantic, Alhambra, Atlantic Radio and TV. Telephone number AT1-6421 and an address, care of Howard K. Davis, 3350 Northwest 18th Terrace in Miami. It's Hathcock's information. Davis was Castro's personal pilot and a friend of Dick Watley. Hall now lives in Monterey Park, California. Telephone number 261-8911. Hathcock does not know where he's employed. He last saw Hall about 2 weeks ago when he came by Hathcock's office simply to talk. Hathcock reiterated that both men are anti-communist, very strongly anti-Castro. No further investigation was conducted, as it's obvious the rifle mentioned above was not used in connection with the assassination of President Kennedy. Really? If that's the case, then why did they fucking go to all this trouble the day after the assassination? Okay, all this investigation done on this rifle was done on the 23rd of November. So they were in Los Angeles talking to Dick Hathcock about this fucking rifle and everything about Lorenzo Hall and all this stuff within 24 hours of the assassination. There's one account that it was found by the lawn crew. Honestly, I don't think it matters. Obviously, the rifle was found in Dealey Plaza somewhere. Obviously, that information was deleted from history. And obviously, they did an investigation into this rifle. If this rifle had not been involved in the assassination, why would they have gone to so much trouble within 24 hours of the assassination unless they found the fucking thing? This document even advised that the thing turned up on television. I haven't seen that footage. I think I remember looking for it years ago, but I don't think I ever got anywhere with it. But yeah, so allegedly this rifle is caught laying in the lawn at fucking in some of the footage, but I never found that. So I have no doubts it's out there. No doubts. All right, let's move on. Next document. This one looks like another typewritten letter from Mr. Weisberg. Quite prolific in his letter writing. Dear Jack, hasty thanks for your 624 and enclosures here today while I rush to you prepare for a hearing in another case today after tomorrow. Hope your move makes you all happy. When there is a time the old notes may be of interest. Thanks and good luck to you. Sincerely, Harold Weisberg, 62877. Here's another letter written to Mr. Weisberg. Dear Harold, it's signed by Corky, but it looks like it's Austin is the last name, perhaps. June 24th, 77. Dear Harold, as per our phone conversation, I am forwarding to you copies of a garrison letter of intro and of an insurance policy. On the insurance policy is the printing of Hall at the top of page. Also, date of birth, the signature in the lower right is Hall's, L.E. Skip Hall. We'll make this an unusually short note as we're in the middle of packing. It seems most likely the wife and I will be in the San Jose, California area next week at this time. However, there are still other possibilities, so wouldn't know until the last second. It may be of some possible future help. I run across some notes that have been stored at my mother's, including, of course, the enclosed. This was California license number of Hall's Cadillac on December 29, 67, RCG 394. Also, my unconfirmed note shows purchase of the Rainbow Motel occurred on the 6th of March, 64. Again, I will stay in contact and try to meet you in L.A. when you're able to get this way. Take care of health and give best regards to your wife. Sincerely, Corky. And I can't really tell what the signature is. Looks like J something. Austin, maybe. But the significant thing here, and I've read this before in the last couple of days, is that it seems as though Loran Hall acquired the Rainbow Motel on March 6th of 64. Where did he get the money to do that? I wonder. And this is the application itself. Loran Eugene Hall, Skip Hall. He actually went by that. Has his date of birth and all that stuff. Married. I don't know anything about his wife. He had some kids. It'd be interesting to get a hold of them. This looks like a pretty standardized application for New York Life Insurance Company. It says here his occupation is bartender. Looks like that's about it. And we have a final page here from Mr. Jack Houston. Okay, so Jack Houston must be Corky. Box 536, Lake Isabella, California. Dear Mr. Houston, thank you very much for your letter of June 1267. I found it both helpful and interesting. I've taken the liberty of giving Mr. Miguel Acocha of Life magazine, who has been working on this investigation, a copy. I would appreciate it if you would discuss with him the contents of the letter and give him any help on any further information you may have concerning Mr. Hall. Thank you in advance for your cooperation. Sincerely, Jim Garrison. Okay, so here, let me ask you guys a question. So this is obviously a letter Jim Garrison wrote to Mr. Houston, a.k.a. Corky, who's an associate of Mr. Weisberg, and he's asking for help on Mr. Hall, right? So therefore, you would assume that Jim Garrison would have a file on Loran Hall in which this letter would end up being in. But guess what? There is no file on Loran Hall in the Garrison papers at all, or one on William Seymour, or Lawrence Howard, or any of these fucking people. There's one on Sergio Arcacha. Kind of hard to avoid that fucking guy. But this does not exist in the Garrison files. This only exists here in the Weisberg files. Unless this exists somewhere in like the miscellaneous files, because you'll have references to Seymour and Howard and Loran Hall in the miscellaneous files. And one day we will get to Garrison's fucking miscellaneous and other and odd sects and all the weird shit, all the weird files that are like seemingly miscellaneous that have all the good stuff. We'll get to those eventually. But yes, this letter here doesn't make it into any of Garrison's files that I've ever seen it in. And so it just makes you wonder where the fuck the Loran Hall file is in the Garrison papers. All right, here's another letter to Dear Art from Harold Weisberg, dated 6/8/77. Contents at this point unknown. Dear Art, this is a reminder to me for when I am there and information for you. You are to keep to yourself until I am there. Plus, what you say may, as I did, take as fun staff. You are going to get a package for me with my return address. My return address is not to disclose the source to anyone. It will hold a reel-to-reel tape. The first part of that tape is the insane conversation Hall had with the unspeakable Weberman. Please try to be prepared to make a dub for him, you, his lawyer, no restriction from me. There is also on that tape what will be restricted, but it just happens that way, and it has no connection with Hall. You and I will listen to that alone. I think it will blow Skip's mind. Okay, just another thing to note, this fucking tape doesn't exist. Doesn't exist in the real world. Can't find it anywhere. It's gone with the wind. There has already been a PSE job on the tape. I do not have all the results. The heaviest stress taken as gross lying is where Hall actually said he does not know Hemming. Next heaviest in the early part, the only part on which I have the results, if they can generally be called that, is where Traficante was mentioned. The stress there is of a nature that can represent concern as much as falsehood. I don't want Skip to know any of this until I play it for him and tape the playing. You do that and we'll have fun. You can tell him because I was sure it would happen. The committee does have the transcripts of my interviews with him and Howard. I was sure they would, so I loaned them copies to Bryson Mills, his lawyer. What is really wild is that somehow they did not get these until after they subpoenaed him. I'm not sure how. I'm not sure, but I think they did not get them until last Thursday. Blow minds again. However, while there were time pressures, I think I gave Bryson more than the committee has. Now for the fun stuff, what I was not aware of, did not think of until later, and would have loved to have observed. As I told you, I had a meeting with 4 FBI agents with Jim. It was kind of heavy. I'd been pouring out strong FOIA complaints and had told them, look, straighten out or I go back to the judge. By now they know well enough to know that when I speak this way, I am serious. I may not always be able to do what I want to do, but I do what I want to do. Do they opted for lesser evil course? I think that particular situation will now be better. This lasted until the time the hearing was to have begun. I got there about 15 minutes after the scheduled beginning. The large room was crowded, but there was a seat in next to the back row at the end, as far away but for that one seat as I could be from the witness seat. I just happened to be next to a college student I know. I was talking to someone, I think Bud, who was sitting ahead of me, when the student says, "Hey, Hall is waving at you and smiling." So I looked up and smiled and waved back and continued this very short conversation. Short because Skip interrupted it. We spoke briefly. He said he'd like to get us together, and he went back to the witness chair. I have no thought to the attention this attracted because of the conversations in which I was engaged. This now meaning Bud. Also immediately, the hearing started. It ended almost immediately, too. Several people came up to me. I did take a glance at Hall, saw he was surrounded by others, and was talking to some friends when Hall came and said, "Let's go." We did. Again, I had no thought of how others would react even then if they would. We walked down the corridor together. I drew aside when he was with Burke. And then he and Bryson and Kathy and Lardner and I left together. Lardner was delayed joining us. What I am now told is that all had the committee bug-eyed. Some of the audience, too. It's also is the only one of their meetings to which I've gone. I was by myself doing nothing to attract any attention, and not even stopped to think that the witness seeking me out had been noticed. If I'd thought, as I did later, I'd have been sure it would. From the time you told me the hearing did not begin until 11, I knew that there was no scheduled spectacular media event for yesterday. That also was not on my mind. What was had no relationship to the committee or Hall, although the session with the FBI agents was one in which I could walk around, and this did relieve the swelling and discomfort in my feet. They were still swollen and uncomfortable. The bus from here to there was crowded. I was lucky to get a spot, but I could not get my feet up. This makes the blood puddle in them until I can exercise the legs enough to permit the muscles to force blood back up. With this experience not having the same on the way back was on my mind, and was the meeting with the FBI people. I'm really sorry I was not alert to what the situation was. I'm sure I'd have relished observing it, particularly because this was the day after Wendell Rawls' New York Times article, Straight Solid Understated, laid another load on them. You realize that no committee people are phoning me and whispering in my ear, but I'm getting this kind of feedback. He could get these people to speak that way 9 years ago. He had this kind of information then, and we can't get him to say a word now. Plus other references to my work, and the very obvious that I did nothing to arrange Skip's obvious trust in or friendship for me after those interviews demonstrated by his seeking me out so publicly. I think that may yet turn out to have some value for him. None of this means anything to me except that there is some temporary enjoyment in it. If he had planned a gesture, I doubt he could have come up with one of more meaning than his, I'm sure, spontaneous act. If any of these characters were looking at me, they had to know it was unrehearsed, beginning with my not getting there until what should have been late, and my unawareness that Hall had come up to me. Particularly because they had just obtained that transcript of mine, there is no one way in which Hall could have more eloquently told them off, and I'm certain nothing like this was in his mind. This motherfucker just likes to ramble on and on forever. You notice that? He's not really saying anything. Now, as a matter of evidence, and committees are not bound by the rules of evidence, there is no way they can authenticate those transcripts. They do not have the tapes from which they are transcribed. They will not dare to subpoena me, and if they did, I'd tell them I would not testify to nay of my work, and they have no right to try to take it. I do know who did the transcription, but that person was not present at any of the 3 or 4 interviews. So if Hall stands on his constitutional rights, there is nothing to keep them from putting the transcripts into the record, and there will be nothing in this record to say somebody did not make it all up. This business is really low-grade soap opera. I learned enough new from Hall yesterday. Virtually guarantee some wild stuff. If they pull some of the witnesses, I can guess. Harry Dean will come apart, especially because Hall is not hung up about who his wife was betting with. He picked it up quickly when I asked him about the guy who had the movie house saying no more about him, with his typical expletives, and unembarrassed by the presence of the young woman lawyer assistant Bryson had. He said sure, he knew what was going on. Dean was in there too. It will really, one way or more, degenerate into very low comedy. There was no comfort in Mud Aliner's villa yesterday from the little feedback I'm getting. There, between what they did to themselves and what was unrehearsed. My scenario, Assassin's Committee linger choreography, is that when I am there, you and your wife, Hall and his and I get together and we play him the tape of his Weberman conversation cold. No prelude, no explanations, no clue. Iceberg cold. And tape it. I think it will be rare fun, so don't give it away. Don't tell even Jody. Let's enjoy. Best, Weisberg. So basically they're trying to get Hall on tape, playing for him a tape that he recorded with A.J. Weberman, who wrote the Oswald Code and a couple other things. All right, moving on. We have another fucking letter from this guy. Jesus Christ. The heading is in handwriting. Let me see if I can tell what it says. Doran Realty and an address in Long Beach. Phone number, home phone number. Dear Jim, Assassin's Committee, Hall hearing, 6/7/77. Well, that committee has thought and said of me in the past is nothing to what I can expect now. When you left me off, I went directly to the committee's hearing room, one of the fairly large capacity, close to completely full. I got to sit next to Scott behind, but who had Dick Billings with him and Kathy. It was late, but the hearing had not started. I was as far away from the witness table as possible in the room, save for one seat. While I was talking to Scott, very soon after I sat there, Hall has come over to me. Of all the people in the room, his voice carries. After a few words, he said he wanted to get together with me when the session was over. I waited, and he did with his lawyer, accompanied by a recent law graduate. We left together with Lardner, and I thought I might find him experience interesting, so Hall invited him. I did not leave the seat until we left. You know, the trip on the crowded bus was a bit much. I'm glad the FBI agents didn't mind my walking around like a college professor, but that did help. Also, I think that went about as well as we could expect. We all went to the Sheraton when the first cab had people in it. Looks like George and I waited the next. They had gone to their rooms and were back in the lobby. When we got there, we all went to the Park Pub and stayed there until the lawyer came here for some records. I thought he should have. We drank extensively, and it was all very friendly. Hall began by giving me these credentials to George and his lawyer. I don't agree with all they write, but the only two honest writers I have ever had any dealings with are Hal and Art Kevin. They are both always honest. Hal he's talking about is Hal Verb. What surprised me, because I have always thought he may not know what is truthful, and what some of his Soldier of Fortune dreams, is that he was completely faithful to my recollection of our long interviews of 268. His lawyer learned a lot Hall had not told him to, as he had told me later. There were stories I had not heard before, and I'm sure there were others. Because it was understood, I saw to it that unless otherwise agree, it was all off the record. I made no notes, and I'm not going to now. This was to protect Hall against a big spread in the Post. And won't the committee have another conniption when they learn Lardner was with us? George made a few notes afterwards. The committee was strange. They were late starting, and they ran a few minutes only. Probably should be over. Hall gave his name and city, and then took the fifth only. They then asked him only if he was in Dallas on 11/22/63, and he again took the fifth. Okay, so let me just stop right here. This is phenomenal. So right here we have proof from Weisberg that when asked if he was in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. Loran Hall took the fifth, which means he didn't want to incriminate himself. I mean, what better proof do we need that Hall was in Dallas? Breyer then said that there seemed to be no point in proceeding, and Thorne said he thought they should agree to keep the subpoena in full force and effect, and Breyer asked if he would agree to return and testify on September 14th, and Hall said less that he'd be back. That was it, and I think it signifies something they are cooking up 3 months ahead is a bit unusual, too. Turns out that this was virtually rehearsed. They told Hall and his lawyer, also his Kansas cousin, Bryson Mills, exactly what would happen. They also told them, as I told Art, that they have Weberman's tape of his phone conversation with Hall. Where is that? Where's the phone conversation of Hall? And what was supposedly destroyed, something that was stolen from Hall's home for me. Not that I knew anything about it until after the fact, when Billings sent a coacher out for it, and a coacher reported that he had not gotten it, and my source told me his associate had gotten scared and destroyed all. Weird. Lawyer is Bryson Mills. His associate is Kathy, whose last name I never got, seemingly bright and pleasant young woman, who is becoming a clerk to a federal district judge. You may hear I urged use of PA versus all agencies, and now they have 3 months. I told him about several decisions. I did not look around the room. I spoke briefly to Bud and Kathy and Billing, Mark and Scott, and at the end was talking to Kevin when Hall came up for us to leave. You can't get much further to the right than Hall, but in his way, he is a pleasant fellow who wants to be friendly. He offered to meet me at the airport, put me up, and even lend me a car when I'm there at the end of the week. I think he meant it. He is under no illusion about my beliefs. Because I did not move around, I missed what even I discount for a generation. Must have been a thoroughly professional cussing out of Lane. I suppose Lane started making one of his speeches or something. Hemming also was there, but I did not see him. If he was well inside or went out the other door, I'd not have seen him or he me. If I'm going to have meeting and drink, I prefer the Sheraton over the Carlton. You remember I drank all the Irish and Carlton had with Walter. Well, that didn't happen at the Sheraton after twice as much, and the Post picked up the tab all around. If I had seen Rawls there, I'd have asked him all along. Hall's okay, and I think on my recommendation he would have agreed. I saw others I did not suggest. I don't know what, if anything, will influence the major media, but if there's anything, it is openness and accuracy. Relative to the immediate, Lardner at least knows how open Hall would have been, if not abused and endangered. This does address the Assassins Committee. George and I were not with them for about half hour because of the different cabs. It happens that all of my background was accurate after so long a time. On Odio, for example, Hall said he just does not know, that he could have, if not the way she says, or he might not have. This is on the question of being there. This is what I recalled, and he told George. The FBI has two other versions, yes and no. Looks like the ALB or the AIB had a handout on which they used in my interview. I did not give it to them or to anyone else, although I intended it for Garrison, that being the purpose of my seeing Hall. Rather getting him to go to New Orleans, I have not read it yet. This has been interrupted by several phone calls, one long and on other matters, so it may not be comprehensible as it could be. One call, approvingly, was from a reporter on the Rawls story. I guess that now I'm past the proper bedtime. I'll read it abed hastily. Here's another letter to Jack Houston, who was Corky, 6/8/77. Corky, by the time you can receive this, I'll have started on a trip I expect to last several weeks. The purpose is to obtain evidence for a suit in which I'm engaged. I expect it to take me to L.A. If I feel up to it after that, perhaps I'll stop off in Vegas on the way back. If I do, it'll have to be briefly because of the need of litigation. This is the minimum. My concern also is for how much I'm up to. This is the first trip of more than a day or so since I left the hospital almost 2 years ago. I've not been on a plane for any length of time, so I don't know if that will make any difference, and my physical strength is not what it was this time last year. If you're able to come to LA, that would be much better for me. If you can reach me through a reporter friend, Art Kevin of KMPC. Here's his phone number. As you probably know by now, Hall took the fifth yesterday. He came up to me just before the hearing opened and asked that we get together afterward. We spent several hours drinking with his lawyers at his hotel. What is surprising is that I recall no variation from the story he told me 268. I then had thought that he was exaggerating and enlarging in various dramatic ways, but in several hours of chatting, I was not grilling him or anything like that. He was entirely consistent after all these years. Either he was truthful or he had really memorized, which I do not find to be easy to believe. The years have not changed him. He is the same flamboyant, overgrown boy. Another surprise is that the committee told him and his lawyer what you once stole from me and then told me your partner had destroyed it, has like a notebook. I'd like to know how this is possible. The obvious explanation is that it was not destroyed, as you said. My opinion for the committee is unchanged. They are irresponsible, dishonest, and wrong-headed. My respect for them is not increased by Representative Yvonne Burke having called me a son of a bitch to a reporter friend. If you are cooperating with them, that is your affair. I hope you do not have unpleasant experiences and feelings afterward if you are. Hall had agreed to be a voluntary witness without subpoena until they tried to deny him the right to have a witness with him. I know this and have from the first. I do not doubt him in this because it is exactly what my terms would have been and what his were when I persuaded him to go to New Orleans after he had defeated Garrison's subpoena in court and did not have to go. Hope things are going well with you. Best wishes. Here's another letter to Gary. This, I'm assuming, is Gary Shaw. 6877. Yesterday, the House Assassins Committee had Loran Hall before them in a show effort that apparently failed. I had written Jim a letter on it and when he called me, so I'll send you that copy. This will not be completely explanatory to you. I can add briefly that my experiences with them are all bad, satisfying me that they are not for real, not honest, not capable, and not likely, if they can reform, to have any credibility. I thus have nothing to do with them. With Hall, they behave particularly badly and without any need. They made an agreement with him through my good friend and good reporter, Art Kevin, for two of the staff to interview him in Art's presence, and then insisted on having no witnesses, while Hall would not accept that they serviced him with a subpoena executed a week earlier, which all of us took as advance indication of intent and bad faith. I recall your interest in that matter, one of the reasons I write. Another is the lingering Alvarez matter, about which I have been in touch with Paul. Paul is Paul Hoch, H-O-C-H. There are some strange things about this Hall business, not all explained by the ignorance, irresponsibility, and media madness of the committee. One that troubles me is part of a story you may recall, although I was not aware of it and had not asked for it and would not have a stranger from whom I've since heard of and did a black bag job on Hall for me. His partner later became frightened, and the story I was given is that what they stole was destroyed. One of the items, an address book of Hall's, is in the committee's possession from what they told him and his lawyer. Paul's been pretty informative on the Alvarez matter. We have had disagreements and have not been in touch, but after I saw the Alvarez statement on his 1975 crap that his work on it was supported by looks like ERDA, I filed a FOIA request with ERDA and asked Paul for more information. It is Paul's belief that ERDA legally had no connection with that project. Maybe Nobel laureates are this way, file a legal notice when it's not applicable. However, I have other information, not about ERDA, that makes me unsatisfied. I can also see that this is a cause of embarrassment for Paul. So I'm asking if you knew anything of this of the past. Anything Paul may have told you that could shed any light on this. I'll be gone for a while. I'll leave for Dallas Friday. From there, I expect to go to the West Coast briefly. I'll be gone about 2 weeks or so. Save that my physical strength is not what it was Things are as they have been, more or less peaceful, with my main concentration now on King records I'm obtaining. Hope you had a good vacation. Best, Harold Weisberg. All right, moving on. More letters. So the reason I'm reading off all these letters is because I think it's very important that we kind of get an insight into the mindset of Weisberg and his investigation into Loran Hall. So he's kind of goading Hall. He knows Hall's involved. He probably knows Hall is one of the shooters. He can't get him to admit it. He's trying to dig into the background of Hall. He's trying to dig into his relationships. And in these communications, which seem like very micro, tedious detail, it's giving us some insight, right? Giving us some insight. So let us continue. This next letter, 42277, Mr. Bill Dick at the National Enquirer in Lantana, Florida. Dear Bill, looks like Warren on the 40 million lives being lost if he did not take the chairmanship of the commission. It is not in post-mortem, as I told you, but in Whitewash 4, pages 24-25. As I told you, if the Enquirer could use my work of 1967 and my publication of 1971 as fresh and original with it, it can use the documents instead of citing the book. I don't remember which of your people phoned me about this one. There have been so many in the past month or 6 weeks, but I had no idea it would wind up this way, or I'd not have told him the rest. The fear of not being able to hide a conspiracy and the certainty that Hoover was hiding one is in the executive session of 12264. I call this part of Ron's attention. He has notes on it, and what else is relevant. Natural follow-up on your, quote, proof that he lied. Ron had another lead from me on the Connolly lie. By now, you will know of Earl Gold's story in the Dallas Morning News of several days ago. I gave it to him. This is the kind of thing someone down there always says is too complicated for your readers. I disagree. It is very simple, and rather than it being new, as Earl had to say to get it in, it is my work of 12 years ago, new today. When Earl had the dubious Nurse Bell story, I told him to read Shaw in Whitewash by using the index on the same story, the medal missing and Connolly. Among the many who phoned me is one interested in De Mohrenschildt. I then warned that there are those left behind who can sue. I could make one very strong case out against the Enquirer. Here I was interrupted by a call from the West Coast reporter who has been more or less in touch with Loran Hall. I've made no effort to do this. One of the files I have not had a chance to refile since Rod was here is the transcript of my 268 interviews with him. Hall is scared. He is about to hide. He has been threatened. The repetition of the threat to me is credible. I know the basis that can be very, very real. I'm streamlining but it appears that A.J. Weberman, about whom I cautioned you before supper time, called him on a new unlisted number and offered him $25,000, saying he represented the Enquirer, and that there had been $10,000 for Altman's, and there is more where the 25 is. The House Committee had sought to approach Hall through my friend, but he had not given them Hall's number. The name used on the threat was of a number of menacing calls. To my knowledge, is the right name to scare Hall more than you will imagine. My knowledge is years old. The person not only has reason to want Hall permanently silenced, he has capabilities. There are reasons for having interest in Hall. The whores and self-seekers and nuts are not likely to be aware. Perhaps by accident they are. But after what happened to De Mohrenschildt, and especially if the Enquirer put out money on Altman's and his tails, if anything happens to Hall, I can see his survivors in court asking for very much money. As without being a lawyer, I can see De Mohrenschildt's doing. That was a crazy piece. It does cross the line in many ways. Before their Tatler folded, Hall files a 7-figure suit against it. Here's where I decided I'd better phone you. If I had not feared that you or one of my other friends might be involved in the silly stuff, I'd not have phoned. What I phoned about is two things I forgot. I had laid them aside to discuss with you yesterday and forgot them tonight after a long day away. One is some very interesting work on the Hunt letter by my friend Howard Rothman, and the other follows what appears to on what proposed to Ron on Edward J. Epstein. Howard sent me a copy of the story in a Palm Beach paper with Epstein's picture and that of an unidentified young woman. Her face is familiar, and I connect her face with what for me is the other side. It is my information, as I told Ron, that Epstein has a $500,000 advance for a thinking book. The governor had made him rich and sort of famous. Howard made an amateur study of the Oswald signature on the Hunt letter he received from Mexico about the time I did. I looked for the Oswald signature and decided it was not real. I also wanted a handwriting expert to go over this, but lacked the money of those of heavy money and mouths to match could have put up in 1975 and did not when I offered it. I have copies of Oswald's signatures the government did not have, and I have just obtained poor copies that the commission did have. I never believed that this was real until the FBI told Wendell Rawls of New York Times that it was. This was Friday, 4/1/77. Then I did much thinking about it. As I told Donald tonight, I think there could be a story in which the FBI lied about this. His experts agree they did lie. On your H.L. Hunt story, if anyone had checked with me, I have a first-person account from a friend who not only arranged the old man's departure from Dallas, but gave me the whole story. You'd never guess what set it afoot, and it was not on the old man's or FBI's initiative. This business of your people having anything to do with a maniac like Weberman makes me uneasy. As you know, I've been dealing on a basis of trust with no notion that anything this irrational was coexisting. I therefore have to ask the records Ron took back stay with you and that they not be made available to any of the odd types who have come into this field, particularly Weberman. What they pertain on their own, even if identical, if a different matter. Except for the 201 record, which is questionable except in Inquirer terms, there is none of this major effort that is new. From what I've heard, if Pope learns this, he will not be happy. The Inquirer could have had that and much more if it had accepted your proposal of so very long ago. That record was not just released. I can see a different story in it now that the Inquirer has used this one, others coming from it. Like when he was in New Orleans, Oswald worked for a CIA company, Riley Coffee. But one wonders who isn't. Just this week, I received some new records that just about say, and another records of the past that do say, that the woman who interviewed Oswald in Moscow and is writing Marina's story also was a government person, CIA and state. She is the wife of a man, did you guess it, whom wrote the newest of the Ray Did It books, George McMillan. She is Priscilla Post, like in Toasties, Johnson McMillan. She is also translator of Svetlana's book. Before I forget, the committee staffer interested in Hall is Fenton. He is really an expert. He never heard of Odio. I don't know how much the Inquirer paid for the Ray garbage, much of which, while in direct quotes, I'm sure he did not say. But I can tell you that it was all public domain, where were not BS in court records. Please excuse the typos. It's been a long day. So that's got some interesting stuff in it, right? More communications. This one particularly was between Harold Weisberg and Bill Dick. William Dick. Interesting. Must have been just a different time back then. All right, moving on. We have another letter to Corky. This one dated a year previous, but numbered number 26 in the list of his files. So this is dated 1/12/76. Dear Corky, who is Mr. Houston, right? I regret to say that phlebitis lingers. I seem to have reached a plateau. Except in work, I have a speech meaning income in a couple days. I'll be away for 4 days, which will put me that much more behind. So again, I can't make as detailed a response as I'd like to your 1/5/76. The invitation to visit Cegas, or Cegas, is great, but I can't afford it, and I can't let you bear the expense. And this time of the year, it is impossible. It would be possible later, perhaps, if I could get someone to stay here after tax season and take care of book orders and answer the phone, etc. One problem would remain: whether my wife would fly. She isn't afraid of flying itself, but the one time she did fly in 1957 on a DC-3 one way and a Connie the other, she was sick for 3 months from something the doctors attributed to pressure. Your offer is, however, warming, and I appreciate it enough to take a little time to tell you a story. When the helicopter ruined our poultry farming, aided a bit by a series of sonic booms, and when we had won the first lawsuit and set a precedent and thus had won the second suit except for the amount of damages, we dreamed of a real vacation. Back when I was a Washington magazine correspondent and freelancer, on a Caribbean cruise vacation when her vacation period came, but a series of anti-Nazi exposés I was working on, or rather the success of the first that triggered the series, made it possible for me. I guess that was 1941, so I drove her to New York, where she took the ship I went to work in, and the next 2 months or less made about a year's normal income. Before I left New York with what I had when I went there, I had enough for the government to seize a major drug firm and hold it for the duration of the war. I don't think we ever had a chance for real vacation after that, and I didn't have one then. I worked like hell. Quite a few Nazi cover outfits were taken over after my articles appeared. Then came the war. While I was in OSS, we decided to move into the suburbs to get more room and so my wife could garden. She's the greatest at it and loved it. Then we could not afford a vacation in order to pay for the house. Then I got disgusted with the dishonesties required by making a living at nonfiction writing and decided to become a farmer. And with chickens, who ever heard of a free minute? So, when it was certain that we'd have a heavy damage settlement from the government, from the secretary down from the Defense Department, could not have been nicer to us, our dream was to go to Baltimore, drive along the docks until we saw a boat we liked, a freighter, and first ask if they'd take us, and perhaps later where. Only the Army and Flyboys decided to fight the precedent we had established by using us as guinea pigs, something I later came to suspect and of which I got proof 2 years ago. And the world-famous lawyer who then represented us turned out to be one of Earl Warren's best friends, and the lawyer he put on our case had been Warren's law clerk. Meanwhile, with the end of farming, I had returned to writing and then to the Warren Report. When they learned this, they gave us a screwing I never expected. They let the statute of limitations run on almost all we could claim for, with an open and shut case. When I learned it was too late for anything except determination and a new lawyer, by keeping saying no to every offer, I finally got enough to pay off our considerable mortgage on this place. So I know we need a vacation, and I'd love it. Probably we could get someone to stay here, but I really think that when time comes to get on a plane, my wife will remember those 3 very bad months and what amounts to an allergy to any kind of noise and not fly. Since the time she flew, I can remember only 4 times she was at an airport with friends who drove my car. She doesn't drive. When I went off on and returned from my first transcontinental speaking investigating trip, and when a friend came to spend a month helping her in 1967 the next year. I don't think she's been at an airport since. However, I would like to spend some time with you on this hall stuff. By the way, my wife was going off for a few days as soon as I got post-mortem at the printers. I was not. I was going to be available if there were any problems and keep things going. My wife was going to spend some time with my mother, then this phlebitis ended that. So I'll make you a counteroffer. You get some local college or civic groups or anything to book me for a speech, and I promise I'll stay several days longer whether or not my wife will travel. With a college, this would have come to be before the end of the college season. If it would or could be arranged, and it came while my wife is working, the fee will not only enable her to take cabs, but would enable me to take her away after the end of the tax season when I can get someone to stay here, and I can promise you I'd use it this way. If you can do this, I'll return it over my lecture bureau, which hasn't done much to date. Hot as the subject is, they get $1,000 plus expenses from which they take their cut, or I'll do it directly. Little as they have booked the speech I'm about to make, I turned over to them. They did not book it for me. If you know anyone who knows anyone at any nearby college, please try, and we can have a good long talk. There is much I want to go over with you besides what you now say. And on this, I've something new. A reporter friend has checked out Hall's claimed alibis. He tells me they do not stack. Otherwise, Hall has solid libel-ease against National Tatler. Maybe the flyers I'll enclose can help with the college. As you know, I'm the one who got Hall to go to New Orleans after he won in court. With Howard, he wanted me to go with him, but I couldn't raise the money. They just got a crazy part in New Orleans, day after day of idle bullshitting. They taped enough of it. Garrison never gave me a transcript, but I got one of enough, if not all. It was pretty sick stuff and utterly incompetent. It is one of the things that wised me up about Garrison and his people. I should, in fairness, make an exception of his regular DA investigators who were not in on this and who I am sure are competent for ordinary police work, which this isn't. This was the time I spoke to your dad about 268. Things had opened to you. Hall, when I interviewed him, was in the VA hospital, ruined by the earthquake. The real purpose of my interviews was to get him to go to New Orleans. I didn't dream that Garrison would freeze me out. Now I have to tell you about him, as it really is brilliant in some way. Quite personable and persuasive, articulate, lazy, crazy as hell, and utterly beyond his depth in this. He never did any real work. He never did any real investigating. He pored over the irrelevant, took anyone else's word he could get, theorized, and two of 10, he just held court with a motley gang fawning all over him. Some exploited him. With your background, what I can tell, it will stun you. It is that bad. Meanwhile, while Hall was there, they even tried to use him to steal one of my sources, a man who would have done anything to help if he'd been asked straight out, but was outraged by the low ethics and morals of it all. When Garrison tried it with Lane, he threw Lane out. So despite your feelings, I have to tell you that there never was any such thing as a Garrison, quote, investigation. There was instead one of the biggest messing up ever. He never even investigated Shaw, not even after he charged him. I didn't know this until the end. Would you dream that the DA would file charges without an investigation? Garrison would have been great as a movie, but in real life, he was a fiasco, paranoid to boot. If there is anything else to which I should have responded, my apologies. As for the typing errors, I have to leave you to figure out. I've held my legs up while typing as long as the ankles and back will stand, and will now make packages in different, less comfortable position. However, I want you to know that whether or not anything comes of it, I deeply appreciate your generous offer, and I do hope that day comes when we can sit down and talk this all through without rush. Best regards, Harold Weisberg. And that was to Corky, Mr. Richard Houston. So it's obvious that there's some backstabbing and shit going on, right? Like, Weisberg didn't seem to like anybody. He didn't fucking like A.J. Weberman. He didn't like Garrison. He seems to want to grab all the glory for himself and shit talk everybody, while him and his goddamn neuropathy or whatever the fuck he has, motherfucker got changed position. If ever there was a goddamn thing that gets me off this goddamn seat to go work out, it's fucking reading these letters of Harold Weisberg, who couldn't fucking do shit and had all kinds of medical problems. Yeah, fuck this. I'm going to work out as soon as I get done with this shit. Fuck that. All right, here's another one to Corky. Dear Corky, 1276, Relit 29, you may be right. My recollection is I was going on FBI reports, and they are not dependable. I have erred before in believing them. I have no independent recollection of knowing his 12263 whereabouts from any other source. MacDonald's book, regardless of what anyone thinks of him, is a gross and deliberate fraud. I'd like to know what and whose extensive amounts of money is behind it, and it's not even a good fraud. So here he is, Weisberg shit-talking another investigator. My activity seems to be at a plateau. It is, and I think for a while will remain limited. This time of year, my wife works as a tax consultant, so all that extra work falls on me. Thanks, best regards, and have a good year. All right. December 29th, 75, a letter to Harold says, Dear Harold, very sorry to hear that hear of your health not being what it should be. For goodness sake, take care of yourself and do not concern yourself with unimportant answers to me. Perhaps the effort you have put forth over these past many years will soon bear fruit. So it's important to concern yourself with what is still to be completed. Please now, at your pleasure and time only, I would greatly appreciate an answer. You stated in your last letter, whatever Hall is, he has an airtight alibi for 11/22/63. This sort of mystified me. I must confess, of course, you are privy to much more concrete information than I. However, I at no time understood H is Hall's location on that date. Let me exchange my understanding with you on that particular date. Upon Hall's indictment in California in late 67 as a material witness for Garrison, Hall prepared a defense built around the testimony of Mr. Robert Hudson. It was preliminary that Mr. Hudson and Hall were lunching together and discussing the sale of an automobile. The Hudson statement was conclusive to time and date. However, after Hall's appearance in court in Bakersfield, California, Hudson recanted his statement, and a little note of this was made, or, as I was to find out, was not made available at the state level to influence the decision on getting Hall to New Orleans. Hall, as you well know, is a master of the twisted story, events, etc. I think I recall your conversation pretty closely when you were in Los Angeles talking to Hall at the VA hospital that Hall could be a triggerman. I personally do not feel he was, however, that is my own speculation. Hall is capable, had motive, so that would leave only opportunity. Let me deal with the motive for a moment and hopefully give you cause to consider. Hall and Associates had been extremely active in Cuban affairs. This according to all accounts, yours, the police, customs, and his own admission. Hall is attempting to obtain money for various organizations, all efforts direct toward a plan or purpose of someone is directing, individual groups or CIA. That had been his lifestyle for a period of years, even prior to his Cuban connection. The 11/22/63 day arrives, and suddenly all activities cease. The man who was in charge of collecting guns, drugs, money, and personnel now comes Hugh McDonald's book. Oh, it seems to cut off there, but basically what he's saying is that all the things that Hall was doing came to a sudden fucking end on November 22nd. And if he wasn't involved with the assassination, his activities should have continued in theory. Now comes Hugh McDonald's book. I do know for a fact this man has credits. I have a long time, 15 years friend who was chief deputy with the Las Vegas Metro Police Department. We'd had many long discussions on the case, and it only took me 5 years to convince him. He's a personal friend of McDonald and was sincerely impressed that he had written of the JFK case. He hasn't as yet had the opportunity to read the book. There are several points of McDonald's writing I'd very much like to go over with you, but we'll save it for later. Take care of your health and write. This is a response from Mr. Houston, a.k.a. Corky. Okay, it appears now we have a letter from Henry Wade, who's a district attorney, Dallas County Government Center, dated January 16th, 1967, so going even further back in time. Mr. Harold Weisberg in Hyattstown, Maryland. Reference Loran, Eugene Hall, and William Seymour. Dear Mr. Weisberg, I received your letter of January 12, 1967 in regard to the above subjects. I have no recollection of ever having talked to either man. There are no records in my office of any charges having been filed against either. Having no records in my department, I would therefore have nothing in regard to their arrests. I had one of my investigators check the records division of the Dallas Police Department, and he was told that Loran Eugene Hall, a white male, date of birth January 4th, 1930, and William Houston Seymour, a white male, date of birth January 12th, 1937, were both arrested by the Dallas Police Department on October 17th, 1963, and were released by that department with no charges having been filed. Any information or records that you would desire would have to come from the Dallas Police Department. If we can be of any further assistance, please do not hesitate to write. Sincerely yours, Henry Wade, Criminal District Attorney, Dallas Police Department. All right. Moving on. Chief of Police, Dallas Police Department. This is kind of muddied, so I should be able to get through it, but it's kind of fuzzy on here. Dear Sir, on or about October 17th, 1963, Loran, Eugene Hall, and William Houston Seymour were arrested in Dallas on a dangerous drugs charge. They were thereafter photographed. Both, looks like in quotes, looks like MIG, M-I-G, but I don't think that's right. Both something and Polaroid pictures being taken. Bail was posted, and ultimately the charges were dropped. I am writing to you for copies of all the records, including pictures in this case. If you will be kind enough to tell me the cost, I will send you a check by return mail. And that's from Harold Weisberg to Chief of Police. Here's another one. Oh, no, that's just a duplication. Okay, so yeah, so we have Henry Wade deflecting Harold Weisberg and referring him over to the Dallas Police Department, trying to get records of this arrest of Loran Hall and William Seymour. But so far, do we have them? Doesn't look like it. But guess what? I have those records. Because I just fucking found them. And let me see. I think that's going to do it for today. I'm tired. Got a couple left from what I was going to shoot for. But I'll get this done tomorrow. Once again, we're going to be on Loran Hall for about another fucking 2 weeks. Because we got about 100 documents to get through. We're on day 3. We're up to about item number 29. So that's going to do it for today, guys. If you haven't bought the book yet, please go buy the book. It's available on Amazon.com. If you're interested in any autographed copies, I've got... I got a soft cover. I think I got one soft cover for $50, and I got about 7 hardcovers left for $75. You guys can message me on Telegram or email me, and I'll get you information on how to pick those up. But I don't list those for sale on Buy Me a Coffee because they're so limited, and I only get them in sporadically. But that's going to do it for today, guys. Tune in tomorrow. We'll continue right here on item number 29, a letter to Tom Bethel from Mr. Harold Weisberg. So until then, see you guys.